Well, Canada keeps on breaking records in a particular category, and it just happened again. Now, this is a record that impacts every single Canadian in a number of different ways, including general quality of life, real estate prices, healthcare, the jobs market, as well as how it impacts the decisions of the Bank of Canada and whether or not interest rates will keep on going up for the time being. We'll get into each of these individual categories, but I want to start with this rather shocking graph. I'll move myself up here for a second so you can read it. This shows Canada's population change year over year in terms of a percentage compared to the USA's population change year over year. And you can see right at the end of this graph, this is where we are right now. Canada's population growth has skyrocketed in comparison to the population growth of our neighbor to the south. And when the new numbers came out just a few days ago for the first quarter of the year, January, February, and March of 2023, well, the trend has continued, adding 292,000 new Canadians. And on a 12-month sort of rolling average, the past 12 months, that brings us up to nearly 1.2 million new Canadians over the past 12 months. And this has broken the record because it's the highest rate of growth in any first quarter in all of the data that we have on this going back to 1972. And let me be clear by saying that I am pro-immigration. I'm not anti-immigration. I think it's good for the economy in a number of different ways, and it makes being Canadian a more culturally rich experience. However, I do think that it's okay to question the amount or the rate or the way in which the government is implementing immigration policy and the way that these rapidly increasing population rates could impact the quality of life for average Canadians. And we're going to get into some of those potentially dangerous impacts in just a second, but I want to be clear that this isn't something that's just happening by happenstance. It's not something that hasn't been planned or sort of actually actively gone after. There are a number of different lobbyist groups in Canada that are actually actively pushing towards increasing Canada's population more quickly, and one of those is the Century Initiative, an organization in Canada that's pushing to increase Canada's population from right around 40 million, which is what it is today, up to 100 million Canadians by the year 2100. That's their stated main goal. And they have a number of different reasons that this could be a good thing here, and they sort of outline these highlights on their website. Our population is aging, our workforce participation is shrinking, more and more of Canada's population is aging out of the workforce, meaning we need more people to sort of support that older age group and fill those jobs. Going on here, they say that economic growth is tied to population growth. This is something we're going to touch on a little bit more to get more clear here. They say that studies predict that if we stay on course on population, our GDP growth will only be 1.6% in 2100 at 53.7 million people, but we could have a healthier growth rate if we had 100 million people. They sort of make the point here that a bigger population gives us more growth, more global talent, and a bigger Canada is more influential in terms of the world stage. We're going to get into some of the issues here in just a second, but they go on with more sort of points here saying it's good for Canada for us to rapidly increase our population, and we see that happening right now with these numbers, right? And it's not just groups like this that are sort of pushing for this population growth. It also makes governments look good as well, and they sort of touch on that here. When you have more people in a country, it makes the GDP or gross domestic product look higher in that country because you have more people working, more people creating goods and services, so on and so forth. And that makes a government look good if you can say, hey, our GDP as a country has been rising while we've been in power. That is a good thing in the government's eyes. We're going to get more into that in just a second, though. So it's good for governments in some ways, and it's also good for Canada's macroeconomy, especially in the eyes of the Bank of Canada, right? One of the largest things that they've been fighting over the past year and a half, 2 years, has been inflation. And one of the reasons that they're saying, inflation is a problem here, or is resulting from a lack of ability for jobs or businesses to hire individuals, a labor shortage, right? So they're saying, okay, if there are more Canadians in the country, then they'll be able to sort of fill those labor shortages. And as a result, companies won't need to raise wages as much. And in their eyes, when you have a rapidly increasing wage growth, that can also feed back into inflation, the thing that they don't want to happen, right? So these are all good things in many people's eyes, and I would tend to agree in principle, but not in practice. I think that there are some large concerns that many people should have when we see these rates increasing so quickly, largely in areas such as real estate and housing affordability, both for rental and ownership, the cost of living in Canada, more people consuming goods, perhaps this increases the cost of living in Canada, as well as a general strain on healthcare, an already stressed system. What does the impact of this population population increase at the highest rate that we have in recorded history in terms of what we have the data on, what impact does that have on these areas? I think this is something that we need to consider and something that's not being talked about enough. Can we keep up on housing, healthcare, and quality of life? Those are some very important numbers, not only for average Canadians, but also for the new Canadians themselves, right? If you don't provide a high quality of living, a place to live, enough money from the jobs to be able to afford to eat, well, then all of a sudden, the sort of steroids of adding more people to your country in terms of the impact on the economy, well, all of a sudden, that sort of well of people that can sort of pump up those numbers could run dry if people are no longer seeing Canada as a favorable place to live, a favorable place to move, because they can't live anywhere. They can't afford to eat, right? These are some of the issues, and it's not just me saying it. There's actually some recent surveys that have come out over the past couple of years that show that this is a rising concern for new Canadians themselves. This survey came out about a year and a half ago from the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, and they say that Canada is a nation of immigrants, and one of the stories we tell ourselves is that we are welcoming to new immigrants wherever they may be from. But while this may be generally true, new survey data points to the fact that many new Canadians are having a crisis of confidence in Canada. The data that comes back from the survey states that one of the challenges for immigrants raised in the survey is the cost of living in Canada. According to the survey, 75% of new Canadians between the ages of 18 and 34 said they believe the rising cost of living means less immigrants will come to Canada. Immigrants are less likely to stay in Canada, a statement with which 46% of Canadians in the same age group, even not new Canadians, agreed with. So I wonder if we might be shooting ourselves in the foot, doing too much too quickly, such that the people who are coming to Canada and making it a better place in general, is my sort of viewpoint. I wonder if the perception of Canada as a place to move to could shift to, okay, maybe that's not the place that we should be going to, right? Which would be a major loss for Canada over the long run because we're doing too much too quick. And this measure of quality of life might sound a little bit abstract, but there's actually a stat that I've mentioned on the channel multiple times in the past that is often used as an indicator for a country's quality of life, and that is GDP per capita. We've already talked about GDP, that's gross domestic product. GDP per capita is just that number divided by the amount of people that live in the country, GDP per capita or GDP per person. So while GDP tracks the entire country's sort of economic well-being or economic output, GDP per capita takes into consideration the individual person inside of that country. Now, when we have an increasing rate or an increasing GDP per capita, that generally denotes a rising quality of living, right? Because in general, there's more money sort of outputting and created in the country in terms of the economic prosperity, the services and goods that we create as Canadians. There's more money being created for every Canadian when you have a rising GDP per capita. I'm doing sort of a surface level explainer here just to get the point across. But on the flip side of that, when you actually have a diminishing or a decreasing GDP per capita, well, the inverse is true, right? Folks will find that, okay, maybe my quality of life isn't as great as it was because while the GDP of the country is going up, my proportional share of that GDP, it isn't really going up. It's actually decreasing. And that's a trend that you can see start to happen right here in Canada with quarter 3 of 2022 and quarter 4 of 2022, both being decreases in terms of GDP per capita. While Canada's GDP was increasing, the GDP per person was not. And based on OECD projections, it seems that, okay, Canada is actually going to be one of the worst countries over the next 40 years if we stay our current track in terms of this important quality of life indicator. And how can you get that GDP per capita number to go up? In order to get the GDP number to go up, well, that's pretty easy, right? You just need to have more people working, more people producing goods and services, more people consuming goods and services, and that can largely be achieved by adding more people to the country. But on the flip side, if you want to get GDP per capita to go up, well, in that case, you need to have every individual Canadian, on average, being more productive in general, right? Without adding new people, adding more productivity to boost up that GDP number. That's the idea of how you can sort of increase GDP per capita. Now, how can we do that? Well, there are a number of different ways. One way is perhaps making it so that Canadians or Canadian capital is more allocated to new businesses, new people creating more goods and services in Canada rather than being swallowed up by the real estate market, which seems to be Canada's favorite pastime, sort of sucking up all the capital into real estate. On top of that, you can make it easier for new and emerging industries to build their companies in Canada to make Canada more productive on average. We largely missed out on the tech boom that was seen in the States. Maybe if we embrace more technology going forward or making it easier to start businesses in Canada, perhaps we can sort of reverse this trend of a GDP per capita decline. And despite my general frustration about the absolutely blistering pace of the population increase in Canada, there are some positive signs here from the current Liberal government in terms of the types of new Canadians that they're looking to attract in new programs. Just a few days ago, Sean Fraser, who is the Minister for Immigration in Canada, gave a talk at a tech conference, something you don't usually see from a minister in Canada. Let's listen in and then I'll talk about it a little bit more.
And folks, fasten your seatbelts because this is a big deal. Here we go. We are launching a new and dedicated pathway for permanent residence that's specifically available to employees and workers in the STEM sectors. The Startup Visa Program, which creates a pathway to permanent residency for entrepreneurs who create companies that will hire Canadians, has been suffering from certain challenges. We've recently increased the number of spaces from 1,000 a year to 3,500. But going forward, we're going to prioritize applications within that system by focusing on features like whether a company's got capital committed or whether it's received an endorsement for a trusted partner. We are going to be launching a digital nomad strategy, which is going to allow people who have a foreign employer to come work in Canada for up to 6 months, live in communities in this country, and spend money in communities in this country. And should they receive a job offer while they're here, we're going to allow them to continue to stay and work in Canada.
So some highlights here from Sean Fraser are making it easier for new Canadians to come in who work in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, making it easier for people who want to come start companies in Canada to be able to do so, and prioritizing people who already have investment to actually get that startup off the ground, and including other sort of initiatives here, a digital nomad strategy, as well as sort of trying to poach Canadians or poach American workers who have been laid off to come work in Canada, saying, hey, I see your layoffs at Meta and at Twitter and at all of these sort of tech companies. Maybe some of the most talented people, you should come over to Canada and work for our businesses. Maybe we can make Canada more productive as a result. On top of these new policies coming from the current government, we actually have non-partisan or like multi-party committees in Canada's government actually assessing new industries and saying, hey, maybe there's actually some good here. This one specifically, amongst other reports that have been coming in, is about blockchain technology, something that I am in general favorable of. I think that there's a lot of scams and a lot of crap out there, but the base technology is very valuable, and I think that we should be embracing it as a country. With proper regulation, you can get rid of the scammy, shady, sort of sketchy stuff that people are losing money from and actually embrace the positive things. But we're seeing reports like this coming through saying, okay, how can the government of Canada get rid of the bad stuff and embrace the good stuff, make it easier to build companies in these new emerging technology spaces? So while the pace of Canada's population growth just seems to be increasing and increasing and increasing, again with some lobbying groups sort of targeting 100 million Canadians by the year 2100, there are some positive signs here that perhaps we could also be making Canada more productive instead of just adding individuals into the country. But the question does remain, will our healthcare system hold up? Will our education system hold up? Will our housing be able to be afforded by the new Canadians coming into the country? Can we avoid these crises while increasing Canada's population, while increasing the debt, or not the debt to GDP, the GDP per capita? If all of those things can happen, then we should be able to have a more prosperous, more fruitful, more fulfilling life in Canada. But if we sort of negate the GDP per capita just to get these sort of surface level headlines of GDP increasing and woohoo, I'm a good government because I've made Canada's economy better, well then I think we've gone down the wrong course. I'm curious what you think about it. Do you have faith in the current government to be able to steer us in that direction? Or maybe you think some of the decisions that are being made are not the best for Canada? I'm curious what you think. Let me know down in the comments below. I read every single one of them and I try to get back to a bunch of them. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. About half the people who watch these videos aren't subscribed, and it's a free click and it helps me out dramatically, especially if you want to support more Canadian content like this on YouTube. But with all of that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time.